everyone, Michael Breddy here from Breddy Musical Instruments. I've decided to do a little bit of a different video today than typical. I usually don't have a bunch of the same key ocarina in different woods on hand. However, at the present moment, I have three beautiful bass C4s, so I figured I'd take this opportunity to give a side-by-side sound comparison of different ocarinas of the same key, so you can kind of compare and contrast some of the subtle nuances between different builds and different woods to get a feel for the different flavors of ocarinas based on some of the properties of each. Now, I have done this in the past with a number of Shun builds, but I've never done this with an ocarina, so I think this would be a good way to kick things off for the ocarina comparisons and take a look at a particularly fun size to build and play. So over the course of this video, I'm going to be diving into each of the ocarinas really quickly, giving a brief overview of the woods used and some of the physical properties of each of the ocarinas, then giving a scale demo for each ocarina to hear the full range, and then several song samples back to back so you can hear each of the ocarinas played in a musical context to compare the sound of what each might sound like when played in a full song. So jumping right into things, the three ocarinas I have here are from my most recent batches of bass C4s. So these were actually built back in October, November, and December. Well, they're unveiled in those months consecutively. These consist of ocarinas serial numbers 44, 45, and 47. So looking at the first ocarina here, ocarina number 44, this was actually the very first bass C4 build that I unveiled back in October. And this really set the stage for the future bass C4 design afterwards. So for all of these ocarinas, I have done a super in-depth unveiling video covering all the woods, the history, the builds, everything for all these instruments in really great detail. So I'm not going to cover that really here, but if you're interested, you can definitely check out the videos on each of these ocarinas to get more details on the woods and the history behind each build. But as a quick recap, for this first ocarina here, we have a body made of iridescent ribbon stripe sapele. There is a thin purple heart band that runs around the body over the sapele. Next, we have a beautiful deep reddish orange puduk top. And then finally, my classic aromatic cedar mouthpiece. So in terms of the builds and the woods used, the sapele is kind of a medium hardness, medium density type wood, very similar to the properties of mahogany. So it's going to have nice warm mid-tones and just a nice kind of balanced mid-range and kind of warmer sound overall, especially with a little bit more open grain structure. Again, not super hard, not super soft, kind of in that mid-range of hardness and density. The puduk, on the other hand, is definitely harder and heavier than the sapele, so that is going to lend itself to a little bit more brighter tone, a little bit more crisper projection. Especially in those upper notes, you might hear a little bit more brightness on a harder ocarina build than a softer ocarina build. In terms of weight, this particular ocarina comes in at 239 grams. So I'm going to compare that with the other ones in just a second. For the second ocarina of today's batch, we have number 45. So this was the first custom bass C4 that I completed back in November. This was a particularly very fun one to do and design, and it's made from a very unique combination of woods. So the first set of woods is this really, really incredible iridescent curly old growth redwood. You can see just the amazing ripple in that grain, the the amazing chatoyance in that figure, some natural cracks and checks, which I think adds a lot of beauty and character and really exemplifies the aged majesty of this particular wood. On top, we have a very different contrasting wood. We have here spalted ambrosia maple. So this was a really unique maple. I hadn't actually worked with maple like this before. I've used a lot of curly maple, flame maple burl. This was my first time specifically using an ambrosia maple, and it was kind of nice that there's this really, really nice lines, almost like ink lines of spalting running diagonally with the pattern. So very cool, very unusual pairing, but I think it works really well together. In terms of the physical ocarina build itself, this is probably the overall softest wood build I have ever done. Redwood is one of the softest and lightest woods in the world. I think the Janka comes out to around 450. It's very, very soft, very, very light. You can feel it, even though it's a base. This is a really, really light ocarina. All the ocarinas I make, except getting into the really heavy, really dense woods like African blackwoods or some rosewoods, which are going to be heavier. Even for all these bases, they are on the much lighter side. Wood in general tends to be much lighter than clay and even to some extent some plastics. So this is a really, really light build. The redwood is super light. It gives a very warm, very bassy, resonant tone. The spalted ambrosia maple is also a very soft, light wood. This is actually noticeably softer than any other maple I've used in the past. Maple burl tends to be really hard and heavy with that really twisted, tightly interlocking wild grain that grows really densely. Maple itself in general, regular maple or flame maple or tiger maple, is kind of on the soft to medium side of woods. It's not a particularly super hard wood, but it's not the softest wood. However, this particular maple was definitely very, very soft. Noticeably so, working with it with the tools and doing the finish. It absorbed the finish almost like a sponge. So both of these woods paired together lend themselves for a really warm, just a really warm, resonantly soft and rich tone. And one thing that I always like to iterate with customers and people who are interested in these ocarinas is that there's no one right or wrong solution. Oftentimes, you might hear people talking about flute making or just making flutes in general that softwoods are inferior to hardwoods. For ocarinas, and I think in general for flute making, I really don't think this is the case. I think this is just kind of a bias kind of passed down through tradition in certain flute making circles rather than based in, in taking into account other factors. I think, especially for ocarinas, whether you're using the softest woods in the world, whether you're using the hardest woods in the world, the woods will flavor the tone. It'll give it some extra character and personality. Super heavy woods are going to be a little bit brighter and crisper. Super soft woods are going to be a little bit warmer and mellower. But at the end of the day, a lot of the quality of the tone comes from the voicing of the ocarina. However, the type of wood will flavor the tone again, but softwoods are not inferior to hardwoods in any way. I love working with them, and I think it's really fun to explore that diverse range between different hardnesses in woods when making these types of vessel flutes. In terms of the weight of this ocarina, this one is noticeably lighter. Comes in at 184 grams. So compared to the 239 grams of the first one, this is definitely a noticeably lighter ocarina. And for a base C4 ocarina, this is a really light build overall. So definitely for people who want a much lighter base ocarina, or people who like really warm ocarinas, lighter woods definitely might fit your preferences better than a much harder build. Finally, for the third ocarina of this set, we have number 47. So this one actually goes in the complete opposite direction of the middle one here, number 45. So this actually uses the same species of woods, but is a radically different build. So what we have here first for the body is just this incredible, super iridescent, super fiery rippling grain of torrefied tiger maple. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the torrefication process, torrefication is something that is done to woods where you take a wood and you bake it at a high temperature in a very low oxygen environment. And what that does is it allows the woods to heat up. It allows you to caramelize the sugars in the woods, change the molecular structure of the woods to some extent throughout the range of the body, of the physical thickness of the wood, without burning it. In addition, it also lends itself to giving a really nice kind of golden type hue. So you have kind of that roasted type look. So you notice that this has a really nice, just this beautiful roasted golden brown color, which I find just absolutely beautiful. It's just really a really beautiful wood. The torrefication process also has a number of physical changes to the wood, just beyond the color and some of the other properties of the woods, in that it is definitely, it works much differently than regular maple. Even though this is a maple, it feels so much heavier, and carving it, it's so much harder. It feels a lot more brittle, but it has a lot more hardness to it. That was very, very noticeable, and the tone of this is also reflected in that, in being probably of the three, this is probably the brightest of the ocarinas in terms of tone. For the next woods, there's a really beautiful iridescent curly old growth redwood stripe that runs along the maple, which matches the curly old growth redwood mouthpiece. And then finally, we have a really beautiful, super tightly curly flame maple top. So this top is actually standard maple, except with just really heavy flame figure. So you can tell, again, that incredible iridescent banding of the curl from the front to the back is truly stunning. This is definitely the heaviest of the builds. This comes in at 244 grams, so a little bit heavier than the first ocarina, 60 grams heavier than the second ocarina. So this has a little bit noticeable heft. Again, still really light for base C4, but it lends itself quite nicely to a more bright, focused tone. Especially with the torrefied maple, I think that really adds to that brightness. Definitely adds to the weight, and it makes for just a really stunning sounding and looking ocarina. So that's just kind of the comparison of the woods. So we have a range of woods, kind of in the range of medium hardness to soft to medium hard, or medium soft. No super hard woods in this build. So for future videos, it might be interesting to compare some really heavy woods with some really soft woods. But for now, we're kind of in the soft to medium hardness type range for all of these builds. Now, we'll get into some sound samples. So for the first sound demo, I'm going to be doing just a simple scale up and down for each of these, so you can hear it one after another to kind of get an idea of the full range. So here is the first ocarina going up and down the full range. Next will be the second ocarina. So again, the much lighter ocarina build of this group. And finally, a scale of the third ocarina and the hardest and heaviest of the builds of this set. So one thing you might notice immediately from that initial sound sample is that all three of these bass ocarinas actually sound pretty similar. The sound hole design for all these ocarinas is identical. Same dimensions, same shape of the sound hole, same type of labium shape that is classic for all my ocarinas. The windway design is very, very similar with the entrance width and height, the exit width and height, some of the other features that I typically do with the bass ocarina builds. So all of those parameters set the stage for that initial timbre to be pretty similar across the range. Something that might be a little bit difficult to pick up through the microphone, but it's something that I can hear playing them in person myself, is that those subtle differences between the ocarinas. Definitely for me, the softwood ocarina, the middle one here, has the warmest tone. It has a resonance you can really feel in your fingertips, just a warm, rich mellowness to it across the range. This one definitely has more overtones to it. You can hear a little bit of it in person on the low end. You can definitely hear the crispness on the high end. It just has a little bit more focused type tone. And then the first ocarina here is somewhere in the middle of the two. It has the warmth, but it's not too much in either direction, I think. So the ocarinas again are going to sound overall pretty similar, and again everything is very similar. The breath curve, the breath response, the back pressure. So all these factors do play into how an ocarina will sound across the range and how it responds, but there's going to be some subtle flavoring of the tone based on the woods. That's something that you have to really just kind of sit down and play with. And I think as a maker, I have to be really in particular in tune with these subtle voicing nuances between these ocarinas. That's something that often causes some challenges in the making process, because I get so fixated on just the small subtle response that I work on that extends how long it takes to make some of these ocarinas much longer than you might typically expect. So now, to bring things into a more musical context, we're going to take a look at each of these ocarinas now playing a full song. So I'm going to actually do 3 song demos, each song back to back for each of these ocarinas. So the first song I decided to do, I've done a number of times before. This is Ye Banks and Braes O Bonnie Doon. I think it's a tune that fits the bass ocarina particularly well. So I'm going to play through all 3 of these back to back, and then we'll get into the next 2 songs. For the second song demo, for these three ocarinas, I'm going to be doing a simple and short rendition of Down by the Salley Gardens. So please enjoy the sampling of that song on these three ocarinas. For the third song demo, I'm going to be doing a rendition of Lugia's theme from the Pokemon 2000 movie. So please enjoy this song sampling on these three ocarinas. For the fourth and final song of this set, I'm going to be doing a rendition of the Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time title theme. So I'm going to go through that on each of these three ocarinas. So please enjoy this rendition of the Ocarina of Time title theme. So that wraps up this side-by-side ocarina comparison. Again, we're looking at three base C4 inline ocarinas made of a number of different woods. Again, just to recap, now that I've had a chance to just sit down and play all three of them back to back across four different songs, definitely in person, I can hear it and feel it very clearly. I don't know how well it's going to get through on the speakers and through the recording, but definitely in person. While each of these ocarinas have a very similar sound profile and response across the range, warm lows, rich woody mids, and very clear highs, they have their own unique characteristics and subtle tonal differences between the three. So the first one is definitely, I think, the mid-range between three of this particular set. It has a little bit more airiness to it, a little bit of warmth, and a little bit of the overtones, but not as much to the extent of the other two. The middle one here is the softest wood ocarina, and that definitely shows in the really noticeable warmth and richness in the tone. It has very warm, mellow roundness to the tone across the range. Although it's warm, it still has very, very clear, clean high notes, but it's just a very just resonantly warm toned ocarina. And then the third one of the batch, which is the heaviest and hardest of the three ocarinas, definitely has much more overtones to it. So on the low range and on the high range, I can hear a lot more subtle overtones, a lot more crispness to the ocarina across the range. Again, there's no right or wrong. One is not better than the other. You're going to probably have a preference to a particular style, but that doesn't necessarily mean that softwoods are better, hardwoods are better. It really depends on the voicing, and like I try to do for all my ocarinas, I try to voice them all equally beautifully, but also bring out the individual characteristics and qualities in the woods, not only from an aesthetic standpoint, but from a sonic standpoint as well. So, if you like these developments and you want to follow along more, you can check out the Brady Musical Instruments Facebook, Instagram, and website pages. Lots of builds going on lots of new instruments and developments, as well as new updates and videos here on the YouTube channel. So, with that, I want to thank you again for watching, and I'll see you next time.